Welcome to the Advanced Freelancing Podcast. Every week, you'll hear strategies for building your online service-based business your way. And now, here's your host, veteran freelancer, author, and TEDx speaker, Laura Briggs.
If you haven't read the book Profit First yet, this episode is going to be a great reminder as to why you need to get a copy of that book as soon as possible. My guest today is Ean Murphy. She founded Moxie Bookkeeping and Coaching in 2003 to work with creative businesses and nonprofits, companies that are often deeply engaged with their work, but frequently not comfortable with the numbers. Moxie's core promise is to make your financial information accessible and actionable, even if you don't think of yourself as good with bookkeeping. Unlike other consultants, Ean isn't a Wall Street or corporate escapee. In fact, she has decades of firsthand knowledge of the challenges of being a small business owner with staff. She is a certified mastery level Profit First professional, Zero Platinum partner, QuickBooks Pro advisor, and certified business coach. So obviously, she knows what she's talking about with money. So let's dive into this uncomfortable topic for many freelancers and make it so much easier for you to understand what you need to know with regard to your finances and your bookkeeping so that you can be successful and keep growing. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Advanced Freelancing Podcast. We're talking about one of your favorite subjects, which is money, but we're going to talk about why you need to be more organized and strategic about how you track it and use it and distribute it throughout your business. So my guest today is a real expert on these financial topics and bookkeeping, so I'm excited to dive in. Welcome to the show. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the kind of services that you offer and how long you've been doing that?
Sure thing. Thanks, Laura. My name is Ean Murphy. I am the founder and owner of Moxie Bookkeeping and Coaching. We are based in Brooklyn, New York, although we have people all over the U.S. working with us. And we specialize in service-based creative small businesses, people who love what they do, but sometimes feel challenged by the money piece of it. Either they just feel overwhelmed by it, or they don't want to do it because they know it's not their genius zone. And I think what makes me a little different than some of the other money people is that I am not a corporate world escapee. I have always been a freelancer and a small business myself, so I understand the struggles intimately.
Yeah, I think that's so important because it's really key to know that you have to have these conversations about your finances, and you really do have to have kind of a touch point with them regularly. So let's talk to like the beginning freelancer who is just getting started out first. They're starting their business and they're like, listen, I want to do things right from the outset. What do you need to do from a bookkeeping and finances perspective when you first launch your business and you know, hey, I'm going to make more than $600 a year. This is definitely a business and not a hobby.
Yep. And even if you don't think you're going to make more than $600 this year, the IRS, and I'm not a tax person, but the IRS will let you get away with claiming a loss for a few years before they say, well, no, this is definitely a hobby. So some of it is you deciding yourself, when do I want to turn this into a source of income that I plan on relying on rather than just kind of a side hustle. But even if it's just a side hustle, you still want to, I think you still want to know things like, why am I earning money? Is there a particular kind of service that people prefer or a particular kind of client that I really click with? And then how much is it costing me to deliver those services? And what sort of overhead, if any, do I need to cover with the money that I make before I can truly call it profit?
That's a really good point. Okay, so from the beginning, we should definitely be tracking money. You should have some type of a system set up to track. I'm assuming the two most important things are the income and then expenses if you have them, which most freelancers who are just starting might not consider some of the things they already have in place, their expenses, like their internet and things like that. So maybe kind of formally documenting, this is my start date. So, if you start on June 1st, then you should start tracking from that point forward, these different expenses that come up from time to time, but also the other ones that could be tax deductible once you verify that with your tax professional, like the portion of your office or the portion of your home that's represented by your home office and any business phones and things like that. So the other end of this spectrum are experienced freelancers who maybe are tracking the money. So like I know I have an accounting software that grabs everything that comes through PayPal or through a business account, but we might not be doing any more than that. So if you're an experienced freelancer and thinking, okay, this is the year that I get more on top of my finances, what things do you think more, farther along business owners need to have in mind with regard to their finances?
Yep. It's basically the same idea, just in a different size, let's say. So whether you're tracking things on pen and paper or using an accounting software, you basically are saying, how am I earning and how am I spending, so that you can make intelligent decisions. So when someone has more work and hopefully more cash flow along with that, the questions that I see coming up right away are, what can I outsource? When can I hire somebody to help me with the things that I don't love doing or I'm not very good at? Is it time for me to move into some sort of studio and out of my apartment? Can I afford to do that? And that's really why I'm a bookkeeper. I did not start out good with money at all. I was never taught how to sort of manage money. It was either there or it wasn't, and I just kind of made do and was not very strategic about it. And that caused a lot of headaches and heartache for me in my early 20s. In fact, I actually ended up filing for bankruptcy in my 20s because I just did not have any financial literacy. And at the time, my financial health was tied to the financial health of the people willing to pay me. So, I was sort of freelancing as an office assistant and being ridiculously underpaid, but again, not understanding what the resources for figuring out what a market rate was, or, how I should say, well, this is what I need to be paid, and how do I then justify that by providing value? And I was bartending. And so again, if there was a slow night or if I got sick and missed a shift, I was just out money. And so being able to have some big picture ideas about what is the minimum amount of money I need to be earning, and then what's my plan for earning that, and what do I do if I fall short this month of that target. Those are all the pieces of information that I think are useful and helpful, and it's the bookkeeping and the tracking of the information that gives you those answers.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I think the more that you know about your finances and the more that you can plan for why you're doing this and the goals that you have, I think that's really helpful as well. So besides bookkeeping software, well, I guess at what point in a freelancer's business should they consider partnering with somebody like a bookkeeper to manage these things for them?
When they feel the pain. But to me, that's the best reason to do something. If you're using Excel and that's working just fine, then great. If you start to feel the pain of, I really wish I could get more information out of this, that's when it's time to change. I'm working with a client right now who's been using FreshBooks for a couple of years, and it's just not giving her the answers that she needs. And so, I'm not going to tell her she can't use FreshBooks anymore, but when she says, I'm really frustrated with FreshBooks, it won't do these things, I go, yeah, it's not designed to. Maybe it's time to think about moving up to a different level of software that will provide you with what you need. Because you certainly don't want to spend, QuickBooks, I think, is up to charging like $60 a month or something ridiculous now. If you're just starting out, that's a terrible burden. But, which is also why I prefer the software Xero. I just think they're a little prettier and easier to use and less expensive. But you want to make sure that you're not paying for features that you don't need or want.
Absolutely. So let's talk about some of those features that a freelancer should keep in mind when they're shopping around for software, whether they're new or experienced. What are the kind of common things that we should have in the back of our mind? Because a lot of times it feels like comparing apples to apples, but obviously these softwares they're very different in nature. So how do we, what factors should we remember as freelancers to be able to compare and make an informed decision?
Yep. I think the first thing is to find out what your accountant prefers, because bookkeeping is sort of filling in little numbers in little boxes. It's not very complicated. Most of it is really easy. It's just saying, where did the money come from and where did it go? So when it comes to sort of interpreting that into the language that the government wants to hear, that's your tax accountant's job. And so we want to make sure that we are making the tax person's life as easy as possible by having things well organized and using a software that they are willing to use, so that we're not paying them for the extra time that they're spending being frustrated with our books.
Great point, because you want to have a good accountant in your corner from the beginning. And if you don't have the right accountant when you first start, you need to upgrade to a person who does know what they're doing. And the more you can make their life easier, trust me, it will come back to you in spades, whether it is saved money or I know for me, my accountants deal directly with the IRS whenever there is a question or point of confusion, and me not having to go through that stress or the frustration of, outdated systems to communicate with a government agency is great. So I think that's another really good point here, is to think about your finances as treating all of this like a business from day one. So you need to have an accountant who understands a home-based business and online business. Not all of them do, which can be surprising to people, but some of them don't really understand all of the different deductions that you can take and things that you could be eligible for. I've been, extremely grateful. My accountants always send emails to their entire list of every time there's an update in policy. They reach out before the end of the year and say, like, hey, these are the things you should consider doing before the fiscal year, before the year closes out, different, depending on where you're at with regards to your revenue and all of that. And whenever there's a big change, like with what's going on with the pandemic right now, there's a lot of different laws that, surprisingly include sole proprietors and freelancers, which is quite rare. And being able to have a source of that information is helpful. And your bookkeeper is another good source of that information. So would you say that having a bookkeeper and the software, is that kind of enough for someone to feel pretty confident that they're doing the right things financially? Can you explain maybe a little bit more about what does a bookkeeper actually do when they're working for a client?
Sure. And let me just start by talking about the difference between a bookkeeper and an accountant. So to me, your accountant is your tax compliance professional. And again, people I think don't know what they're quote unquote supposed to get from their accountant. So they sort of take whatever is given to them. And the point that you just made about having an accountant that is proactive, that is actively looking out for you and actively communicates to you is key. And your accountant can really help you make sure you're paying the amount of tax, the least amount of tax legally allowable. And there is no one kind of accountant. So you'll find accountants that feel very comfortable playing the gray area and letting you write off maybe more than you even really spent. And there's other accountants that will, swing really hard in the other direction and say, let's not even try to write that off. And so finding someone whose advice sort of sits well with you and feels right is really important. If you don't like what they're suggesting because it feels either too strict or too loose, it's probably not the right accountant for you, because you want them to be keeping you in compliance. So the difference between what a bookkeeper does, and it can get a little confusing because some bookkeepers do accounting and some accountants do bookkeeping. The bookkeeper is really the management accountant. They're the ones who, again, record what happened in the past and say, here's the result of what happened, and we've double checked it against your bank, and here are the reports. And oftentimes that's where it ends. So there are better accountants and there are better bookkeepers, which again, to me, a bookkeeper that is really worth engaging is someone who doesn't just say, here are the reports, but someone who says, do you understand what you're looking at? Do you have any questions? I noticed X, Y, Z. Can you tell me more about that? And that's really kind of squinching over into the CFO realm, for someone who's more of a strategist with you. And I usually recommend for freelancers or even for people that are not, they're trying to control their overhead costs, you can be your own bookkeeper. Like the software, QuickBooks and Xero and FreshBooks and all of them were designed for people who are not accountants to try to make it as simple as possible. And one of the big stumbling blocks that people come up against is, well, I see a category called dues and subscriptions, and I don't really know what goes in there. So I'm going to put everything in there. I'm going to put my online magazine subscriptions in there and my software and my memberships. And so then when they look at the number that comes out, like that dues and subscriptions as a category doesn't really make sense to them in the first place. And then they've got this big number that doesn't actually help them at all. And so what I often do as sort of a consultation, whether or not someone works with me in an ongoing way, is to say, let's start by customizing your chart of accounts. And people go, I can do that? And as long as the software will let you, yes, it should be designed to track the things that are important to you. So if you just want to know, what did I spend on, my telephone, fine. But if you're like, well, what am I spending on my cell phone versus my answering service or my VoIP service or my cable telephone or whatever it is, if you don't care, no one cares. It's right. Anything that's related to the business is a tax write-off. So it's about, how do I get the answers to the questions that I'm asking? And if I'm not asking a question about it, then I don't need to be that detailed about it. Does that make sense?
Are you curious about how to get started working as a search engine optimization writer? Always loved writing, but don't understand the technical elements? No worries, you can easily teach yourself. And this podcast episode is sponsored by the Advanced SEO Writing for Freelancers and Bloggers course. You can learn more all about how to choose keywords, how to pick topics for your clients, how to complete a content strategy audit, and how to write a fully optimized SEO piece of content writing that you can sell for $50 and up. Check out tinyurl.com/advanced SEO writer to learn more about this course and to enroll. Yes, it absolutely does make sense. And it sounds like there's a lot of moving pieces in here. And I'm assuming that a bookkeeper becomes more important to your business the more complicated things get. So is that accurate to say that as your revenue is growing, and as I know, like I have multiple different expenses and all of the businesses are under one umbrella, but they're all generating in different ways. So is there a function of a bookkeeper that sort of includes like recording and reporting out on those types of things, or is it strictly to match up like this is what happened during a particular month, and these are the records to kind of back you up?
At its heart of hearts, that's really what it is let's say what happened. And so because of the way that the software has developed over the last decade, so much of that can be automated, so much of that can be streamlined, and more importantly, in order for me as your bookkeeper to record what you bought on Amazon, you're going to have to tell me. And so my take is always, unless you are so busy that it's easier for you to shoot me an email and say, hey, I just bought, project supplies on Amazon for like $40. Can you figure that out? I think it's easier for you to learn how to use the software so that you can go in and say, this is what I spent at Amazon, and categorize it how you want to. And then I sit back and just do essentially a double check where I go, great, let's look at what came in from your bank. Let's look at what you categorized. Let's make sure that all lines up, that nothing got duplicated or skipped, because sometimes technology glitches. And then if the starting and ending balance match, then I feel comfortable saying, hey, here's your summary report. Please take a look at it and make sure you understand what's happening, so that you can ask me whatever follow-up questions you need. Why was this category so high? Oh, right, I forgot I took, my conference bled over into this month, or whatever it is. But the act of simply recording transactions is so simple that the only reason to outsource that to a bookkeeper is because you don't have time to do it, and you've got money to pay somebody else.
Which is a really good point to make, because you have the opportunity to do this on your own. And it sounds like there are good software items out there like Xero where you can implement this into your business if you wanted to. But again, if this is something that you've put off and you don't have the software at all, and you've been dreading signing up for it because you don't really understand how it works and you don't care to learn, or you don't feel like you have the time, outsource this to a bookkeeper so that you can get on the right track right away. Now, you mentioned that knowing how to use the software yourself is a great way to be able to interact with the bookkeeper. And we talked about verifying that the software you've selected works well for your accountant as well. Are there other things that freelancers should be doing to set themselves up for a successful relationship with their bookkeeper?
Yes. I mean, I think that one of the reasons I really push people to learn how to do their own bookkeeping, even if we end up doing it, is if you're trying to abdicate rather than to delegate, if you're just pushing it all across the table and say, I don't want to think about this, do it for me, that just leaves so much room for error of, you have someone at the other end guessing. I think what you spent was for this category. I think this was for this category. And if you're not regularly reviewing it, which in my experience, people who don't want to do any of the data entry often don't want to review the results, then that information is basically useless to you, because you can't rely and say, I've looked at this, we've discussed it, and I know that this is correct, so that the assumptions that I make based off of this information are also far more likely to be correct.
I like that. That's really helpful for people who are thinking about how they can work most effectively with these financial professionals that you partner with, and you should have them. And as you scale, it's just like how I'm always talking about, you need to have a virtual assistant. There are certain things in your business that you really shouldn't be doing. And if your time is really booked up with taking care of clients and doing marketing, this is something that you can take off your plate and still have the peace of mind that it is being done and that it is being done properly. Now, do these reports kind of help freelancers figure out, sort of from a cash flow perspective of, okay, this is what's coming in and this is what my expenses are? I'm thinking about when you're getting ready to make a bigger investment. So maybe you are thinking about upgrading your computer, or you're thinking about signing up to work with a coach or to invest in a course. Does this help freelancers kind of see where their money is going and make adjustments in that process if necessary, or decide the right time that it is to make an investment?
It can. And I think what you said about a VA is spot on. So, for me, I would hire a VA before I hired an outside bookkeeper, because a VA would have a much better idea of how I earn and spend money. And then again, a bookkeeper like myself could be a second set of eyes to just do the reconciliation piece. But again, one of the limitations of bookkeeping is this trying to crystal ball the future based on the past. And so the system that I actually recommend above any kind of budgeting is based in a book called Profit First by a man named Mike Michalowicz. And Profit First does not replace your bookkeeper or your CPA, but it does replace budget spreadsheets. Because what it does is it divides up your income by purpose. So you get a check for $1,000 and right away you go, okay, I'm going to set 5% of that aside to protect my profit and begin to create a cushion for the business for times that, like now, we might be going through some rough financial pieces or a slow month or a slow season. I'm going to set aside 15% so that when it comes time to pay my estimated taxes, I already have that money and I haven't accidentally overspent it. I'm going to set aside a percentage, maybe 50% of that, to take home for my pay to cover my personal expenses. And I'm going to leave the remaining 30% to cover everything else. And so then you can sort of say, does that fit? Are my operating or my overhead expenses higher than 30% of my general overall income? And you can always look back at your numbers from last year to sort of get an idea of that. And if so, where can I begin to innovate and get strategic about, if I need this thing, is there a better, cheaper version that would give me the same quality? Or what can I cut that would not harm a relationship between me and my clients or me and my vendors, and not diminish my service that I provide? And so what that does is now you have a bank account that's only holding 30% of your income, and that's the only bank account that you can spend from. And if you want, you can even create another account that saves up for special events, conferences, coaches, etc. And that just tells you right away, am I running sustainably? Am I healthy? And that works from $1 all the way up to $50 million. The percentages change a little bit, but that idea works for every size business.
And Profit First is such a great book and road mapping tool. I think one of the things that I struggled with when my business first started to grow was the idea of expenses. And there was a year that I ran my freelance business as an agency. And only at the end of the year, when my accountant came back to me in January, I realized how little money I had actually made and that I was running at like 70 to 75% expenses. And so my margins were really narrow because I was essentially not paying anything to myself. I was paying all of my subcontractors, but I hadn't allowed enough room in there with what I was charging clients to compensate myself. And that was a big eye opener for me because I'd never heard of anything that told you percentage wise, based on what your business's revenue is, this is where you should try to aim to be with your expenses. And it also, as your company grows, you might need to invest more in other expenses, like that VA that you hired for 5 hours a week. That might turn out to be someone who's an online business manager or an executive assistant that's working more like 15 or 20 hours a week. And you can feel comfortable in making those decisions to hire those people and also to upgrade based on the fact that you know where your percentages are at. And so it's really broken down well in that book to make sure that you do pay yourself, because don't make my mistake and pay yourself nothing for almost an entire year. And it helps you decide, I keep a running spreadsheet going of where like my monthly recurring revenue with my clients, and then where I'm spending business expenses. And so I have a number that matches up with that percentage of where my business is at, so that when I'm going back and forth of, okay, can I afford to hire somebody new? Can I afford to invest in that program or to buy this thing that I want to have within my business? That's a data-driven decision based on my percentages and where I'm targeted and trying to be. So if you're totally stumped by getting started with all of that, I really encourage you to read the book. It's very well written and breaks it down very simply. You don't need to have an accounting degree or be a CPA to understand it. It's really designed for business owners that are not completely confident in what they're doing with their finances, and you'll come away with a lot of tidbits and action steps that you can implement right away.
Absolutely. And I think it also helps reframe every expense into this, what is the return on this investment? So if I hire a VA, what am I hoping that will do, so that it's not just an expense, but I'm hiring them to take on this piece for me so that I can focus on bringing in more clients or better paying clients. So I can see right away, if I'm handing off, those 5 hours, I want to make sure that both of us agree that there needs to be some return that more than covers the expense. Otherwise, why bother?
An excellent thing to keep in mind. Now, where can people go to learn more about the different types of services that you offer? Maybe get some more information about Profit First and bookkeeping.
Yep. Our website is a great first step. It is www.moxiebookkeeping.com. And we do have a section on our website where you can actually download the first 2 chapters of the Profit First book for free. And if you're a creative, we also have a free Facebook group called Profit First for Creatives, people who are in the process of implementing and maybe aren't ready to commit fully to having a coach help them out, but still want to be able to get some support around their questions.
Oh, that's an excellent resource for people who want to go grab those first 2 chapters of the book for free, see if it's for you, and then also start implementing it. There's no reason not to get on top of your finances, and this episode is a great reminder of that. Well, I just want to thank you so much for coming here and sharing your insight. This has been really, I feel kind of selfish a little bit because I got a lot out of this episode, but I'm sure that my listeners will as well. So thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing all of your expertise.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. And if anyone does reach out to me, make sure that they mention you, and I'll make sure to give them an extra special treat.